All right, I think we have 1:30 on the clock, so I should get this show underway. Thanks for joining us all today, for bringing your Rails monolith as your business grows. And while I'm up here talking, I'm Carrick Rogers, the Director of Engineering for our web applications team. This is very much a group presentation that is made possible by all the hard work of all the engineers that have contributed to various portions of our code base, and they're down in the front row. So unbeknownst to them, they may have to help answer some questions, especially in areas that I'm not known on. Sorry, Lily, I got you in the end. So, who is Ontra? What do we do to start with? We process, digitize, and analyze private market legal contracts. The simplest way to think of this is investment banks like to sell a lot of things to each other. They have legal obligations that come out of them, and they need to get those contracts through. They need to understand, what do I need to report to my investors, what do I need to report to the SEC, what do I need to report to them 6 months from now. We also do all of that with unions and pensions. So we have a lot of AI-enabled software that helps specialist lawyers process these contracts and pull out the key terms that they're going to have to use to power their reports. And we are a Ruby on Rails monolith. The Ruby on Rails part, I imagine, is quite unsurprising, with an Ember.js front end. And we've been around since 2016 when the Ruby application launched. I think we actually, I'm told, soft launched in late of 2015. Our CTO wanted to say he was responsible for doing the entire first round of the application, so he pulled a bunch of all-nighters before our principal engineer, Jerry, joined, to avoiding having to share the initial credit. And we've been in the same code base and mono repo since inception, and we have about 100 people, we're headed towards having worked on it. And so then why this talk? One of the things we found, especially as we've been going out, hiring, talking to potential vendors, contractors, everything, is we get variations on what is your code base like? Why haven't you moved off monolith/mono repo? Microservices are very much a thing. And then it's all leading up to the big question of, are you still on the monolith because you want to be or because you have to be? Often asked in the vein of, is your monolith just too hard for you to shred and escape from, so you're stuck on it, or are you actually happy there? And we've thought about it, and we're actually quite happy there, both in terms of our ability to function at scale and in terms of our ability to actually have a code base that you have a lot of engineers committing into one repo and not be stepping on each other's toes, not be constantly running into problems. And with the frequency that we've been asked this question has kind of gotten us thinking, how did we end up happy? We can think back, to some certain decisions that we've made over the years, and those led to specific high points or low points with regard to our happiness. Those paid off or didn't pay off. But at the same time, we realized we never really had a full-on retrospective of how did we make all of this work? How did we actually end up at a point where when we tell somebody we're talking to that we're happy, we're not just, lying to them as part of the pitch process, but we're really happy there. And so we kind of started thinking of that, and we came up with this talk. And this is a talk where if we had a time machine and we could go back and we could talk to ourselves 4 or 5 years ago, we would tell ourselves, hey, this is great, keep doing this. Or, yeah, this was not such a great idea, you shouldn't have done something this way. And hopefully for folks out there that might be looking at, thinking about keeping their monolith alive and functional as they grow, they can also, derive some value from that. So before we, jump in to where we are, I want to kind of just, set the stage for how big of a monolith we are. So we're at about, I'll say, I'm sure we're over 4,500 commits by now since I pulled these slides together a couple weeks ago. And I'm pretty sure people have been working since then. So I believe we've broken through the 4,500 barrier. We have 48 different code committers. We have about 62,000 lines of Ruby code spread across app, lib, and config, and about 112 in our spec directory right now, because tests are very important. And then on the Ember side of the world, we have a little over 61K of JavaScript and a little over 33K of handlebars. We have all the usual suspects in our Ruby on Rails tooling: Active Record, Redis, Sidekick, what you'd kind of expect off a standard monolith, especially one that kind of came out in the mid-2010s or so. And then just to prove, we have Project Olive Scorpius off of, this is not a real project, but off of kind of our demo environment showing, yeah, we are actually a real app. We can show you things about documents and attorneys processing documents, and track through multiple versions of the file, which I'll touch on as we get into this more. So the first thing when we were going back and looking through kind of our decisions on what did we do right, what did we do poorly, the fact that we came out with those 110,000 lines of Ruby testing within our spec proved to be very useful to us. And then we started to think, back early on, we were 3 engineers, and we got up to 5. We were, you want to generate revenue, you want to prove you have product market fit, you don't have any concerns about operating at scale, you have just concerns about, am I going to exist in a year type of situation. And how did we come up with the space to actually come through and have decent testing patterns? And what we realized was we were actually, in retrospect, fairly pragmatic about this, and very much unintentionally so. So hopefully some other folks can be more intentional about this. When you look through kind of our Git history, and I talked to some of the older hands, initially we only had our spec tests for the Rails API. So if you call this controller, does JSON appear? Does the JSON you expect appear? And then obviously you're inferring that your front end is going to take that correctly, and you're really hoping that things are also ending up in your database correctly. So that came out, though. That actually let us get out the door pretty quickly and be pretty stable. We brought in, capybara tests came later, and then Ember CLI and Simple Cov came in even later for actually testing test regression. Today we're working on, we're using RSpec tests for a lot of kind of full-on feature tests where we're checking to make sure things are rendered on a page. And that's why I have this lovely code snippet here, which we did not come up with, so I made sure to call out Ryan Big, whose blog post we stole this off of. Whenever you're trying to work with Ajax, Capybara doesn't like to work for it, or at least the version of copy we have doesn't. So we have a great little counter system here where basically check to see if the DOM is in the ready state and reporting that everything is returned. If not, go ahead and sleep for a little bit, and we'll keep sleeping for up to 5 seconds unless you manually override that, which obviously is going to have some long-term implications as we go to scale by building in mandatory wait times. And now today, as we come into 6 years of existence, we're even at the point where we're working on forming an automated testing team. We still want our engineers to write automated tests, but we're actually we've survived, we've gotten to the size where we can have full-on automated test engineers, automated test manager, and all of that. But overall, we've made it to 97% coverage when we sit there and we run simple cov and check for missed lines. And a lot of that, I think, again, comes back to pragmatic early on, and then as we had resources going through and actually doing it right. I also want to, talk about some other tools we've brought in over the years. No, we did not bring in a Leatherman multi-tool to our code base, but being in Portland, I figure I should give a shout out to Leatherman. They did make our booth possible by letting us open all our boxes with the various knives. But very, very important. But we didn't start out with much just beyond the standard Ruby on Rails stack. And I think one of the really big things we've had is we've added in Brakeman for vulnerability scanners. We've added in Bundle Audit for spotting gems that need to get updated. And of course, we've added in Rubocop. And I would call out Rubocop as another area where we had our similar pattern of start out very small. We just started out with vanilla Rubocop. And now we actually write our own Rubocop rules. And it was something that we didn't get into until a couple years in. And I've come off the slide. And now what's really come into important is kind of the usage of those tools. Our CTO from day one, Lane, had a really strong focus on developer ergonomics. And that extends just beyond, oh, everybody gets a nice laptop and a nice monitor. He was always an advocate for having tools around testing, linting, and vulnerability scanning. And fundamentally what we've realized is by having the advocate for those tools, by having those, we kind of unintentionally, again, locked ourselves onto a lot of community practices. We brought in RuboCop, and we just did whatever when RuboCop started reporting violations, so we just fixed them with RuboCop-A. Brakeman came in and started spotting injection risks, so we fixed them. And Bundle Audit started coming in and telling us best practices on the gems. And basically, rather than trying to come up with our own patterns for the monolith, we were just accepting the community patterns, and that really paid off dividends by limiting the number of patterns that could evolve. And that's going to be a theme I'm going to keep hitting on as we kind of continue to run through this talk. That, of course, we have our initial code base. We've had all these tools, and it's great. We have these tools, we can pass all automated quality checks, but we also need to go ahead and meet the needs of the business. And we've seen a lot of, growth in terms of activity from the users on the site. That presents its standard scale problems. All of those pesky N+1s we failed to catch have come back and bitten us at various points in our life. But what I want to dwell on here that I think has been really critical is we've had a lot of complexity increase in terms of the persona of the person using the site. Ultimately, we're allowing lawyers to process documents for companies. So you have the lawyer coming in and trying to process the document. You have your banker that would like their document, but we've had other people come in. We have, say, the compliance departments at some of these banks would like to come in and get consolidated reports of all of their obligations. So now that's a new user persona we've picked up. Initially, we thought we would just kind of have independent lawyers that wanted to go out. The one I always like to talk about is she lives in Cancun, works about 20 hours a week for us, which pays for a beachfront place in Cancun with all the surfing you can do when you get to bill out what a lawyer gets to bill out. And we thought that would kind of be the person we'd have. In reality, we've discovered a lot of lawyers are starting to set up full-on law firms, and they like our business because it allows them to have some guaranteed input. While they're out trying to get cases for their local court, they can commit to X hours of not as exciting document processing per week. So we've had their legal staffing team start to come on. And we've had to expand a lot of the business logic of our code base. We've had a lot of those Ruby lines come out of that. And a lot of what we've realized, thinking back, is we were actually really lucky for keeping a lot of our models clean. We also have more complexity for our internal customers. We definitely didn't have a data science team when we were young early on. You wanted to report, you talked to an engineer, and they dumped something out, probably in a CSV file, and that was called the data warehouse back in the good old day. And then, of course, there's just new customer features like, hey, I want to integrate with your API versus sit there and look in the web app. And as we've gone through and had to address all of these, I've pulled out a couple case studies that I think are interesting for kind of this a pattern that I think has really come through with us. Initially, we were all active model serializer for Ruby on Rails. Everything we did, AMS right up to Ember, and then we started to run into scaling and performance problems there. And what we came out, we looked towards the community again, and we actually came towards JSON-API serializer, which it comes out of. You may have heard of it. Used to be supported by Netflix as Fast JSON-API. They have deprecated support. As kind of an ironic aside, our current VP is from Netflix, and he was telling me, hey, I wish I had some code to work on. And I was really excited because I was about to give him all the tickets we want on the JSON-API serializer since it was the next Netflix code base. Only discover he never contributed to that code base, and that dashed all my hopes there. But the process we kind of unthinkingly evolved here that I want to advocate for is right now we have 117 active model serializers and 106 JSON API serializers. And we brought in JSON API because we were running into the performance problems. Pages were loading slow. We were having people connect directly to our API, and they were running into timeouts. And there was that initial urge that we all had for, great, JSON API is new. It's the exciting new thing. Let's just rip out all of the AMS serializers in one go, which would have been a lift of about 200 at the time. I know the number is higher than that now, but that's because we've added more. And there was no way we were ever going to get approval from product pragmatically to do all of that work. And so we've kind of, instead, as an engineering team, we came up with rules. First off, you have to fix the serializers that are too slow and the customers are complaining about. You can, we also had brought in Datadog as a tool by this point, so we could start to see some of our P95 and P99 times for slow loads. So we said, let's go after those as well. And we started to build a case for replacing those. For everything else, though, we just left it, and we evolved two very firm rules. If you're going to do a significant refactor to a controller or a model, you're also expected, that's probably going to mean you're going to have to touch the serializer. At that point, you should convert the serializer over to JSON API. And then anything new you write, also JSON API serializer. And that actually let us address the tech debt in a, what I would, as a relatively scalable way, where we've, we're about 50% converted. We brought JSON API in about 14 months ago, and a lot of the AMS ones we have are kind of in dark corners for internal admin tooling, and their existence doesn't really hurt us. It's in a fairly stable section of the code base. And compared to some of the other places I've been at, I've been very happy with like how it's, it hasn't just been something that's let us solve our problem. It's kind of preserved our relationship with product in terms of we can articulate what we're delivering and why we're delivering it. Oops, and I need to get my mouse back over here. The other one I like to talk about is Enums. And this kind of shows another thing you see when you look at this whole monolithic code base. Our initial way for doing Enums was the simple Enum gem. And that was, I would say, probably the Ruby community standard back in the day, right up until Rails 4.1 came out, which introduced our active record Enum. And we were on active record Enum up until last summer. Active record Enum was scaling great, no problems. We had the same method where the older simple Enums hadn't been converted. Anything that we were doing now was active record Enum, and we started to hire a data science team. And this was a case where we had an issue with internal customers, where I started to get questions like, hey, what does email frequency 2 mean? What does user preferred contact method 3 mean? To a data science team pulling that into a warehouse, that was very not useful. So initially there was kind of that push we all had where it was, oh, what if I just give you a dictionary where you can map those integers into something meaningful? That got pushed back on, as the data science team did, rightfully so. And so we built our own Enum gem in-house that we call ICC Enum, because we also used to be called In-Cloud Council. We've since renamed ourselves, but refactoring all those ICCs out of the code base, that's going to be a whole-on thing. And it's been very successful, but what it's been interesting in is it's, again, the same pattern where we've stayed under Rails community patterns and just followed them up. We hadn't ripped the simple Enums out. We still have about 90 of them floating around. We did end up ripping out all of the active record Enums because we only had about 20 at the time that data science spoke up. So it was like, well, we can just go in and clean those out really fast and get ourselves down to 2 patterns to maintain. So fundamentally, the point I keep trying to hammer home here is we've kind of capped ourselves with the number of patterns we have by staying on the Rails community patterns. You go up, it's been really great. You go look through our code base, you're like, oh yeah, that's how you did it back when Rails 3 was a thing. oh yeah, that's how you did it when Rails 4 was a thing. And the fact that we didn't get creative really served us well. And no, we can't claim that we had the foresight to think that through, but we're pretty happy with that. That being said, there's also, what would we improve kind of coming through here? And what were we too slow to do as a mid-sized company that was converting out? So the biggest one we had when we came back is the lack of an architectural decision process. We very early on, as we rightfully said, small team of engineers, every engineer has to be a guardian of our architecture. That worked really great when we were probably one team. When we were two teams with very strong separations of concerns, did a really great job. Whoops. So one click in. But we, really didn't do a great job when we started thinking about the holistic code base. People had strong patterns for solving their internal problems. For example, we were really bad with state machines. We have a fun lunch topic of how many state machines do we have? Do we have 2? Do we have 3? Do we have 2.5? And arguably, when you're at the point where you're debating how many state machines you have in your application, you've, it's kind of academic that something has gone wrong at that point. A lot of our state machines are based off of kind. We track the versions of our documents. We track the status of their documents, and we track other kinds. If you've used Rails a lot, you've seen kind CD, which is a enum for tracking out kind with an integer number. And then from there, we kind of infer state. But at no point did we ever build anything where you can just call thing.state, thing.states, or the one I really missed from previous code bases was pass in a state with an as of timestamp that tells you what state it was in at a certain time for an audit state. And in hindsight, that's something, especially dealing with a lot of business logic, we wish we'd pushed for early on. It was always tricky because when we go back and we look at it, the product spec was build a thing to do X. That thing had some states. And then going back and having to talk about let's build a whole state machine up from nothing would have been a extra talk to product. But in hindsight, we would have gone back and told ourselves to fight that battle much earlier on and push for some of that internal tooling and unification rather than let each team solve their tracking problems independently. We also have a bunch of other auditing gems that add in. So ultimately, we've come to the point where we have our, we would say we have strong internal abstractions and really good patterns. Each team, we challenge them to be a guardian of, their architecture. They did a really good job. Things like we never had a team whose mandate was a universal thing like a state machine, and we've suffered from that. We're also very tightly coupled with external vendors. I have a big lift on my hands the day that MailChimp finally shuts Mandrill down for good. That's going to be a fun one to go through. What we've done and wish we'd done earlier is we've started to form an architecture team to focus more on abstract integrations. And in hindsight, we wish we'd done this earlier. Some of this comes back, it steps beyond coding, but staff engineers, principal engineers, they're expensive. Going back and asking someone for the money to hire one, it's a whole thing. Plus you'll have to have some other seniors pulled off onto the team. They're not going to be delivering immediate value to the company in terms of building a feature. But we wish we'd done it. We encourage everybody else out there, when you're coming up in that size, start thinking about having a team that doesn't have a mandate to just deliver a product feature. Think about having somebody that has a mandate to deliver tools internally in a very clean manner. Our pragmatic approach of refactoring when needed served us well. We were always able to bring in new patterns based off the community, get them in quickly, whereas we never had to go out and sell a full-on lift and shift of all 60,000 lines of the code to some new pattern to product, which made it a lot easier to get space. Very happy with all of that. Sticking with community patterns versus having in-house ones. It's capped the maximum potential number of patterns we faced. It's also made onboarding really good because all that documentation from Rails 3, Rails 4, it's still up there. So when I have a new hire come across one of the dark corners that we haven't gotten back and fixed up yet, we can still find something to link to them that's actually useful versus having to keep 4 versions of our own documentation up for patterns. And as my final bit before we get into Q&A, I'll get myself ejected from Rails conference. But our spec tests served us very well early on. But we should have gotten into Ember tests a lot sooner. We were trying to use that one hammer for every single nail. It's really slowed our test suite down. As I mentioned earlier with that wait for Ajax, you're pretty much guaranteed to be waiting a minimum of a second for something to happen. We really should have pushed to write Ember tests earlier and speed the test suite up. It's a big shift. And love our spec. We'll continue to use our spec, but we shouldn't have just said, oh, we're a Rails shop, so let's just use our spec to make sure things are rendering on our front-end pages. And with that, we have a few minutes left, so I want to thank everybody and ask any questions for folks might have.
Hello. I find one of the hardest parts of maintaining a majestic, monolith is the upgrade process, which you never touched on. So I'm very curious, what was your upgrade process like, and would you do something differently?
Yeah, that's a good call. That's a great call. So we've stayed very highly aggressive on upgrading. The minute a point release of Rails comes out, we task one of our teams onto it. I actually, when I joined during peak pandemic. And we were fairly behind on our upgrade. So myself and the principal just sat there for those 2 weeks around Christmas and New Year's when everybody else was off and the code base was stable, and got ourselves up and just said, we're never going to let ourselves fall behind again. And that's served us really well in these past couple years. But before then, we were very guilty of letting things sit for a while until we got to end of life. And I would say, just the minute something drops, get an MR up, see what breaks, and hopefully what breaks is going to be fresh in people's minds because they've been working on it recently, and tag your whole team in just to get the MR through within a day or 2 of it coming out. Well, thank you, everybody. You've been a wonderful audience, and thanks for your time and attention.